Here we go. All right. So welcome to session number 6. We're looking at body paragraphs today. So hopefully you brought some of the elements of your homework for discussion. So I was asking for intro paragraph, which we're going to go over in a moment. But at the same time, we're also going to go over the evidences that you came up with to craft a couple of body paragraphs later on. So today's all about this idea of how to kind of formulaically approach body paragraphs. I want you to know structure first and then break those structures afterwards, just because having the foundation down, at least kind of like subconsciously, you know what to do on the AP exam or just writing a paper in general. So once you have that down, you can be a little bit more flexible and free to do what you need to do. So without further ado, let us get started. Let me just make this a little bit easier on the eyes here. Here we go. So agenda looks something like this. It looks like a lot, but it's not. They're kind of like spread out in terms of short tasks. Maybe the lecture's a little longer than usual, but either way, today we're going to start with a little bit of warm up, just kind of like to make a little connection to the readings that you did for 2001's AP Rhetorical exam. Now, if you haven't opened the document yet, please do. Just make sure that you have that in front of you for the questions, but also for the text that we're going to be analyzing in a second here. We're going to review the homework. So a couple people have contributed their intro paragraphs. I'll go over those 3 that I got. And if anyone else wants to contribute, go ahead and do so. But otherwise, we'll talk about what succeeds in those 3 and how they basically follow the formula of an intro paragraph and what succeeds in general here. We'll look at the student samples as well, just kind of like compare and contrast, juxtapose what they did versus what you did, just see kind of like how close you were to the mark or how far you were from the mark for how the AP exam readers graded them. And later we'll look at the devices you came up with. We'll do a little bit of body paragraph review, and then later we're going to try to format our own body paragraph by the end of today. So our warm-up is a little bit different. Let me give you some context first before we approach this, and then later I'm gonna have you kind of jot the responses down onto your sheet here. So following clips no more than 2 minutes or so, and it's from a sitcom called Scrubs. And Scrubs is all about the life of like doctors and nurses, and it's supposed to be humorous, but it also has these undertones of seriousness to make a point here. So to kind of start off in terms of the context here, JD, the guy on the very top over here, this kind of goofy looking guy, he's an aspiring new intern. He's the bright new star of the hospital. He's basically like the success story, despite the fact he's so goofy as like a young kid, right? And despite all his good work, the person he wants to be acknowledged by the most is his mentor over here, Dr. Cox. This guy's pretty much like hard ass 101. He basically tests you and makes sure that you get your job done. Now, in this scene, JD needs an evaluation from anybody really, but he wants Dr. Cox to do his evaluation because he wants to be recognized, right? I'm doing hard work. I'm a good doctor. I want to be basically seen by the eyes of an expert, a professional, and be evaluated in that light here. So as you're watching this 2-minute clip or so, and the text is in the document as well, I'm going to have you consider 2 questions. Number 1, in what ways does Dr. Cox want to influence JD as a doctor? What methods does he do to persuade him? And it's more the implicit side, you'll see that in a second here, but in general, if there is sort of a mindset or a philosophy he wants to impose onto JD, how is he doing that? But number 2, kind of related to our homework that you had, how does this relate to 2001 AP reading? And as you're watching this, you might see the similarities, but also the massive juxtaposition that exists here. So without further ado, I'm going to open that screen, mute my mic, and if you guys can't hear, just let me know for this video here. Okay, boom, boom, boom. And then I'll mute, and we'll watch this real quick.
Look, this is so unfair. You're supposed to do my evaluation, not me. And you know what? You're gonna do it, buddy boy.
Buddy boy? Why?
I'm serious.
Relax, Nippy. It's just an evaluation. It should be easy.
Well, if it's that easy, then it won't take you that long to do it.
All right, well, don't you worry about it another minute there, newbie. I'll evaluate you. I'll evaluate the hell right out of you.
When?
Oh, just the second I get off work.
Fine.
Fine.
Great.
Great.
Here it is. You get off like 6-ish or...
Oh, danger. Oh.
Stay calm, stay calm, stay calm. Oh, good. He's not here.
Dr. Cox?
It's time. Sit down. What do you want? want me to say? That you're great? That you're raising the bar for interns everywhere?
Cool with that.
I'm not gonna say that. You're okay. You might be better than that someday, but right now, all I see is a guy who's so worried about what everybody else thinks of him that he has no real belief in himself. I mean, did you even wonder why I told you to do your own evaluation?
I can't think of a safe answer. I just figured.
Clam up! I wanted you to think about yourself. And I mean really think. What are you good at? What do you suck at? And then I wanted you to put it down on paper. And not so I could see it, and not so anybody else could see it, but so that you could see it. Because ultimately, you don't have to answer to me, and you don't have to answer to Kelso. You don't even have to answer to your patients, for God's sake. You only have to answer to one guy, newbie, and that's you. There. You are evaluated. Get the hell out of my sight. You honest to God get me so angry, I'm afraid I just might hurt myself.
All right. So with that in mind, I'm going to have you consider these two questions here to answer, and later we'll look at some volunteers in about 2 minutes or so. So just again, to reiterate, what are some ways that he wants to influence? What methods do you do to make that possible? But at the same time, how does this kind of relate to this reading that we just broke down for 2001s? So give about 2 minutes or so, and we'll come back together as a class. Alrighty, that was about 2 minutes on my clock. If you are still kind of thinking about your responses, go ahead and do so. But otherwise, I'll kind of document what you came up with for number one, but also for number two, whatever one we want to start with, or just to contribute to. So, and like same as before, if you want to kind of just raise a hand for this, go ahead and do so. Or if you just want to type your response down and put it for the group chat, then I'll just document that on the sheet itself. So if you're still working, no worries. But anybody want to throw in a couple ideas for one and two right now? Or was 2 minutes too short? We know that in a minute or so. Yeah, Andre, go ahead. Oh, hold on. Let me allow you to unmute yourself. My bad. Go ahead. Sorry.
So for number two, this video relates to the 2000 AP reading. Well, originally I saw that like it was actually kind of like contrasting in the tone, right? The 2001 reading was like more comforting, while this one is more like invective. However, they're both similar because they're both like pushing someone to be better. In that, this one is saying like get rid of your insecurities and just like only answer to yourself. Well, that 2001 AP reading like comforts the audience, but then to ultimately like invigorate them to be better. So it's just two different methods to the ultimate goal, that is like inspiration.
Mm-hmm. And this piece is chosen really to kind of like get that idea down. So if you understand one piece, you can contrast it with other ones here, and you notice the tone for this work compared to the other one. You're absolutely right. It is comfort versus invective, whereas Dr. Cox is more about in your face, trying to have you think about things on a way that, you know, is sharper and is more degrading. Lewis in her piece is more about, look, I've been there. Don't worry, you'll get through this, right? It's more, comforting is the right word here. Jolie throws one out real quick. I think this one would be for number one. Yes, absolutely. So she writes, Dr. Cox wants JD to focus on improving himself as an intern rather than be too tied up on making himself appear, quote, the best in the group of interns. Yes. And so it's sort of the story of you versus society, or you versus others around you, where it's more about self-reflection and self-improvement rather than what you want to get from other people. So it's funny because in Lewis's piece, it deals a lot with like, this author thinking like, oh, I wish I was as good as you, or I don't think I can make it in the writing world. And it's like, look, buddy, just focus on yourself. Andrew throws another one down real quick. So he writes, Cox wants JD to be able to perform duties by himself, by his own ethics and morals, and ignore how others would perceive him. At the end of the day, as a doctor, you're going to have to do things that others don't want you to do. Your patients, yes. And it's sort of the idea where you have to know on your own sort of like volition, on your own sort of like grounds and foundations, what the right thing to do is. And if you're only listening to other people, or if you're only like following basic instructions, you'll never really know what that right thing is. And so in this case, it's not easy to digest, but it's something you have to do, especially in the field of medicine in this case. Anyone else? Other things that you notice from this one here? I'll take one more, and it's from iPhone, whoever iPhone is, but no worries. Copy and paste that real quick. So Dr. Cox wants to influence JD as a doctor by emphasizing the importance of acknowledging his skill sets and not turning to others to seek validation. Yes, because while JD is a good intern, he is intent on receiving praise from others rather than improving as an intern. Absolutely. So in this case, the sort of persuasive goal is more about acknowledging rather than seeking acknowledgement. And that's the distinction here that is very clear. Can you tab back to slideshow? What do you mean, like back to here? Oh, my bad. Damn. You guys gotta speak up. My bad. All right. So maybe that's why it was a little awkward for people, but these are the responses that we went over overall so far, but otherwise they're all pretty good in terms of your observations of this clip here. And it deals a lot with like tone, or the things he's kind of like intending, or methodologies in general here. Anybody else for a quick last one before we move on then? All right, if not, hold your peace. We'll go back to this if we need to, but otherwise I'm gonna go on with the rest of this then. I used this first to kind of get you an idea to think about topic sentences, to kind of think about key pieces of a work and key intentions of a work here. What you guys came up with in each of these sentences here, they serve either as thesis or topic sentences, where you're basically designating a paragraph's worth of a particular task to look at, or what the overall things work is trying to do in general here. So with that in mind, we're going to basically use this as our jumpstart into body paragraphs here, how to basically prove a smaller claim in the context of a thesis, a bigger argument, and so forth. So just to kind of like review the homework reading in case you didn't get a chance to read it, or if you are still a little bit lost about this work, the prompt basically is this, right? On the very bottom of the 2 sentences, it says, read the letter carefully, then write an essay in which you analyze the rhetorical strategies Lewis uses to establish her position about the development of a writer. So 2 things had to be satisfied here. On the one hand, you have to know her position on writing, but number 2, you also have to know her views on developments regarding writing in general. And in a quick summary, just to make sure that you understand what this whole thing's about, really what Lewis is saying is writing is super hard, that there's no formula to it, that if you're struggling, you're on the right path, and really there's no element that should hold you back as a writer. You just keep doing it in the most painstaking way possible, and even when you're done, it's still going to be hard. And that's it for the most part here. With that context then, a couple people have given their intro paragraphs, of which I'm going to run through and just kind of get an idea of what worked and didn't work. So this is divided based on components of a topic or an intro paragraph. I'll kind of show you where I divided up in terms of what the person provided, but otherwise these 3 are all pretty successful in terms of intro paragraphs as a whole. So I'll read them verbatim, kind of analyze them as a whole, and then we'll move on piece by piece. So this author wrote, the common aphorism, the pen is greater than the sword, describes a unique phenomenon of empowerment that one experiences as they submerge themselves into a world of writing. Such a saying would have been most resounding to the woman in the 19th century, an oppressed minority in a patriarchal society. So author does a pretty good job so far, right? Up until this point, they kind of give an aphorism, a quote, an idea to kind of apply to this particular time period, specifically towards women. And these 2 people in the letter, but also the letter writer, are women who are kind of talking about the general topic of writing itself. During such a time period, women sought solace and resolve in the form of literature, oftentimes critiquing and supporting each other in penmanship through times of struggle and strife, reinforcing a culture of individuality and inspiration. And this author does a further good job, kind of like boiling it down, getting to the actual point of this letter here. This isn't just a random letter. This is a letter where women acknowledge that they have to use this format to back each other up, to write ways of encouragement and inspiration, because it is a world that's very like anti-woman or very restrictive towards women here, which then starts to move us towards the actual contents of the letter. So everything here I would consider as a premise. Everything here is basically kind of what leads up in history, or just the relevancy of this piece here. And in the blue is where we get thesis, which includes also like rhetorical situation, and the author puts the 2 together basically. They write, writing under the pseudonym George Eliot, female English novelist Marian Evan Lewis does the same in her letter to a fellow woman struggling to express her personal creativity, consoling her in her attempts at writing, and encouraging her to keep on the path in a variety of methods to ultimately foster a society of equity. And this is a pretty complex and strong thesis altogether, because on the very first part of this, it talks about who is giving this piece and also the circumstance of writing this piece, right? They can't just straight out say they're Marian Evan Lewis. They had to write as a pseudonym a male name, George Eliot, to get their piece out. But that aside, and that besides the point, what they're really trying to do is they're trying to give to a fellow woman who's struggling a method of consoling her, of encouraging her, and they use a variety of methods to basically foster the society of equity. And it gives a very good point, and all the paragraphs, at least in my mind, are clear as to what this author is going to do in the subsequent body paragraph. So overall, this is a very good intro paragraph. It has a very clear premise. It has a very strong thesis. It might be missing rhetorical situation, but that's okay, because the premise is pretty much covered by them already anyways. Now, if you wanted some rhetorical situation, the next 2 actually provide that. So these are kind of like what we talked about last time for intro paragraphs here. They're all similar-ish, but obviously every author has their own flair. So for this one, writing has always been an important part of society with its features of conveying emotions and formulating fiction that tells a lesson. Okay, good premise. Writing appears to be prominent during the mid-19th century amidst the Romantic era, in which many authors and novelists have become more inclined to write. But how do these writers develop themselves in such a way where their literary works become known in the world of writing? And that's a really good question from this author here. They asked this rhetorical question here, of which they're going to answer perhaps in the rest of this intro paragraph, in this idea where everyone wants to write more in this time period, but how do you develop yourself in a sea of so many writers, especially perhaps if you're a woman during this time period, because again, still barred from everything else. So they further write, and this is a rhetorical situation here. An English novelist going by the pen name George Eliot writes a letter to an American woman to discuss the aspects of genuine writing and wants the readers to understand her position as a writer who takes utmost passion in her work field during a time of confusion, because youth plays a large problem of one's development in writing. And so this author here, what they've done is they've taken this sort of like context and situation of who's struggling, what's happening, why they're writing this letter in the first place, and condensed it to this little sentence over here. And then finally, they get to the thesis. In this letter, Eliot draws the life of a writer, providing her experience with writing to educate other writers about how to become better and more intellectually careful about their work ethic. And just like that, very concise, this is Brevity 101. She's drawing from the life of a writer, good. Providing her experience with writing, good. For what purpose? To educate, to help people become better and more intellectually careful. This is Thesis 101, and it does a really good job in terms of like setting up the entire essay and just knowing what the work was about in the first place. I'll do one more before going to student sample. This one, it's basically a denser version perhaps. It does a lot more with the rhetorical situation, but it still follows the formula of what we talked about last time, right? So the very first part is premise. This author felt like I'll do a little bit of premise, but not perhaps too much. They write, beginning a career is daunting as there are inevitable fears of failing a job that one had dedicated their entire education and life to. Good point, it is scary. In particular, authors face the uncertainty of whether or not their hours put into writing literature will ever be published and appreciated by the world. And so this author does a really good job talking about the themes of writing and the writing task. It's scary to invest so many hours only for it to be for nothing, you know what I mean? Finally, they transition into the rhetorical situation. In the 19th century, where gender roles made it uncommon for women to pursue careers outside of domestic activities and raising children, English novelist Marianne Evan Lewis writes about her past experiences of her career to a young aspiring American writer, Melusina Fay Pierce, to kindly reassure her that a persistent writer who is truly dedicated to executing their own work will eventually overcome obstacles and gain success, regardless of how long it takes them. And this by itself is a great summary of the entire piece. Rhetorical situation basically is like the summary of what's going on in the entire thing. And this author did a really good job just basically taking the entire passage, letter, condensing it into one long sentence and just talking about speaker, occasion, purpose, everything that is components of this piece, and putting it in our face here. I'm working with this. Let me let you know what I'm working with. This is a rhetorical situation. She also emphasizes that while fame is great, writers must remember to appreciate happiness beyond their careers. So kind of like a little caveat, a little bit of, hold on, there's still this to consider. Along with the entire rhetorical situation she came up with, she also acknowledges and notices that Lewis is saying like, well, careful, even though you might become famous one day, you got to make sure that you know what happiness really means in a career like this. And then finally get the thesis ultimately. As she discusses the evolution of her personal writing career, Pierce passionately reveals that the development of successful writers lies within the maintenance of patience in the earlier years of the career, as well as the importance of writing to their own desires and interests to truly gain satisfaction in their own work and happiness in life. And so this is a really strong thesis too, because it lays out the two things perhaps that Lewis is really trying to emphasize to Pierce, but this author really details all the sort of like points that Lewis makes in these longer sentences, these longer phrases to describe what's going on in this piece here. So all three of these intros would score a 1 point for sure in terms of thesis, but they would set off the essay in a really good way for us to consider here. I want to go over one student sample. There are two here, but there is a shorter one and there's a longer one. Both of these scored pretty well in the AP exam. There's a 9-1 and an 8-1. I'll read the 9-1 and then later the 8-1 you can look at your own, but otherwise you guys aren't too far off, and quite frankly, you guys have far exceeded their intros already, because You guys can write your own intros and your own pacing on computer and all that. So I think it's a little easier. But even then, like you blew these out of the water already. So this is what scored a 9 out of 9 in terms of intro paragraphs. This student wrote, the only thing that all writers have in common is that they write. And it's kind of like, okay, I guess, fine. Writers come from different backgrounds, different time periods, and different, sorry, I'll repeat here. And different locations, and all bring varied experiences into the act of setting pen to paper. Writing is tough, both physically draining and mentally frustrating. And without some sort of support group, a network of acquaintances who share the same struggles, it is difficult to endure the agony of what many have called, sorry, a little bit missing. I think this is, have called mental constipation. If you see so far, this writer does a really good job in terms of listing, but they also do a really good job of control for end dashes. So even though they're kind of saying the same thing that our other authors have said so far, it does also show that they have like this good mechanical usage of stylistic writing. So if you can put that in, that's slowly adding to your sophistication. But otherwise, they further write, writing to Miss Lewis, Miss Pierce reached out for support, and her plea to Lewis was so, quote, touching and tender that it elicited a response. In her response, Lewis consoles Pierce by explaining her views on the development of a writer. Using metaphor and personal experiences, she succeeds in her quest to offer advice to the burgeoning Pierce. And it's still a good intro paragraph. It's just perhaps a little bit lacking in terms of like premise or a rhetorical situation. But anyways, it still does the job. It's 9 out of 9. And if you want to follow this for maybe like just conciseness, fine. But these previous ones, they pretty much do the job, if not better, compared to these over here. So just keep in mind that you guys might see the samples online for the AP essays, and you think to yourself, like, damn, how could they score a 9 out of 9? Don't undersell yourselves. You're actually pretty close, if not far exceeding of what they have there. Like, it's not outside of your realm of experience, you know what I mean? Like, if you had some more time, you could definitely do it. And even on a short time crunch, if it's a prompt that you're really familiar with, you can do it. So with all in mind, before I get to a couple of examples that you guys came up with, I want to just kind of share a small little excerpt of my life to kind of make a connection to the reading that you guys did. So bear with me. I want to take you a few years back to my college years to kind of like make you think about your own writing too. So I didn't have a picture of myself in college. I don't take pictures often, but my point of the story begins with this. So this is perhaps my third year in college, and I had read a lot. I had written a lot. I've pumped out so many essays by this time period. I've read so many damn books that I thought I was pretty much a master of English at this time, right? And maybe to some degree that was true. I had a better grasp of it, but for the most part, everything was mechanical. This class asked for an essay in 1 week, I did the essay in a week. This class asked for a research paper in 2 weeks, boom, I did that. I never really thought about my writing altogether. And so there was no commitment, there's no emotional attachment, at least for the academic stuff, right? Everything was just kind of like, I turn this in, I get points, bada bing, bada boom. And so I had this professor, Dr. Schillinglaw, she's our department chair. And this woman has written for a long, long time. She's director of the National Steinbeck Center in Salinas, California. So basically there's this big ass museum that's dedicated to Steinbeck. She's in charge of it because she's been reading, writing, and voicing documentaries about John Steinbeck for 28 years. Like she knows Steinbeck, you know what I mean? If you guys thought like we had a pretty good understanding of Steinbeck from Grapes of Wrath, like this woman knows Steinbeck and she knows writing and she's done a lot of work in terms of that field. And one of her tasks that she gave me in my third year of college, she had an assignment where we had to get a portfolio of 5 of our best works ever written for any class, whether it be fiction or poetry or an essay. And she said, give me 5 of your best works, sit down one-on-one with me and tell me why it's good. And I was like, shit, I don't know if I can answer that because I've done work, you know what I mean, for the most part, just because I had to, but I never thought of it as my best work. I just kind of like turned it in and I was like, this is probably going to get an A. So I was sitting there like, damn, what do I choose from the pool? Because again, I never had like a personal connection with my work, right? Everything was very low stakes. Yeah, you get points, you get like credits and everything, but there's never been a chance where someone critiqued my work on a very personal level. So imagine this, right? You're sitting in front of a person who has all these years of experience, a person who is really well-versed in English, and they're just looking through your work and they're telling you the whole time tell me what's good about your work. And the whole time it's like, I think this is good because of this quote, because of how I wrote this, because of blah, 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 right? And the entire time I was super uncertain. And Dr. Schillinglaw told me, look, I'm doing this for one reason. I don't want you to feel pressured. I don't want you to give me some bullshit responses. I just want you to reflect on what you've been doing your entire life as a writer. Because if you don't, then you're never going to learn. You might be able to do a body paragraph, but you never really know what's inside of it. You might be able to do a thesis or intro paragraph, whatever, but you never really knew what went into it. You have to know your foundations. So the entire point I'm trying to make here is that when you're doing these lessons with me or just writing in general, it's a story of show me, don't tell me. Because ultimately, you're going to graduate from my class. And you're going to go to college and further on, and you're going to write your own editorials, research papers, whatever documents, and you won't have me to tell you what's right or wrong about it. And that's okay. And that should be the case. But by that time, you should be able to look at your own paper and think, this is crap, I want to revise, or this is good because of X, Y, and Z. And what Dr. Schillinglaw was basically trying to tell us was, do you know what your topic sentences are? Do you know what your evidences are? Do you know what you're elaborating? Do you know what your transitions are? Do you know what the fuck you're writing? And at that time, I was like, kind of, but now I do, right? Now I actually look at my writing and think to myself, damn, this is what I'm really writing. And for any piece that you guys turn in, it's really the story of, if it's not your best work, admit that and then move on. Admit that that was the best thing you could have turned in, but it can be improved. And so with even body paragraphs, there's a formula to it, but it can always be improved and it can always be better. And by the time that you actually master it, boom, you're good, right? So that's kind of our goal today. Can you be aware of your body paragraphs? Can you be aware of what you're putting into your paper ultimately? But we first got to know what to go into the paper here. So you should have some devices that you came up with from the homework here. I want to get a couple of ideas from you before we go on. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Take about 2 or 3 minutes, kind of pick your best evidences from what you saw from Lewis's, letter to Pierce. 2 or 3 minutes, go ahead and just like pick and choose, copy and paste in the group chat, what have you. And later we're going to compile a list of things that Lewis does well to reassure someone like Pierce in her journey of writing. So 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll come back together. All right, about 2 minutes on my clock. Hopefully some people had their items here. Is it in the class homework doc? Oh, okay. If we're confused, okay, let's clarify real quick. So I was giving you some time to basically pick from your homework that you did regarding the Lewis piece. So I was just asking for some rhetorical devices that you came up with as per the homework. So I just gave you some time to pick and choose maybe your best ones. But if you want to just copy and paste it in your group chat, in the group chat, then go ahead and do so. Let's see. Let's have Devin start us off and see if we can work from there. Devin, go ahead.
So in one of them, I thought it was hyperphora questioning. So the quote is, "Does this seem melancholy?" So I put this quote because like she doesn't want to sound sad to like inspire her to keep to like actually write, because she wants her to write but also know the struggles at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So in this case, she does. Well, she first asked this question, right? Sorry, say that one time.
So she doesn't want to sound sad, but because of writing, it's really a struggle to do, and you have to face it, because there will be a break for you in the end, or you will like get what you like, the writing you like to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is more towards the middle end of the piece here, where she asks Pierce, where she's kind of like, "Hey, does it seem melancholy you're doing this? Because it shouldn't. I think it'd be sadder if you receive like, what do you call it, like empty praises or whatever."
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this case, is to ask this question to clarify there is a break at the end, and also to like change her view regarding writing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely. Good start. So just kind of like that, we're looking for a couple of devices that came from the work itself, just kind of work with here. So I got another one from Joel. I will copy and paste this here. So she wrote, "Juxtaposition of her younger self with her current status of a satisfied writer shows her evolution and how she changed her mindset to become successful. She went from hopeless to believing in and trusting herself to write to her own desire without the validation of others." Absolutely. Juxtaposition is a big one in this case here, because it really shows that like big compare contrast between past and present, young versus old. And so in this case, it's kind of like, hey, I made it. And I'm going to let you know that what you see today is vastly different from the past. Anyone else for other devices here? We're also looking for like trends. We're looking for things that the author perhaps does most often with. Whoa, this is a big old paragraph, but let me just try to copy and paste this one here. Okay. Andre, get you in a second here. And let's see how this looks on the document first. Oh, it's not that bad. All right. So Ivy wrote in this case here, "Long sentences. I enter into those young struggles, 30 of yours to get knowledge, into the longing you feel to do something more than domestic duties, while yet you are held fast by womanly necessities for neatness and household perfection, as well as by the lack of bodily strength." Yeah, this is like a long ass sentence given by her, and question being like, why do that? So Ivy clarifies, "These long sentences that Lewis writes represents a stream of consciousness good and allows for the reader to connect with her better, because the lack of pauses in her writing reveals the overwhelming flood of emotions regarding how much Lewis relates to desires of wanting to be more than just doing the necessary functions of a woman." And that's actually a really good application of stream of consciousness. Usually stream of consciousness is kind of like, well, why are they writing so much? In this case, Ivy infers, analyzes, and makes a pretty good kind of like interpretation that it deals with this idea of subconscious or consciousness existing, of just like activating these nostalgias, or just thinking back like, damn, I remember those old days. Andre, another one, go ahead.
So I noticed there's a hint of satire almost, but it's not like it's more for humor that is like for ethos. So I don't remember the specific device, but it was oh, I got fired, but at least I have more time to spend with my kids now. It was that device. Oh, do you remember what that was called, Mr. Lin?
The second you said it, I lost it in my head, but I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay,
but go ahead.
It says that she says that oh yeah, it sucks that you haven't like written since you were like 30, but that's okay because the people who have written already are probably burnt out, right? And it's sort of like, oh yeah, it's kind of funny because like even though you really wanted to write, there's like the flip side of it, which is humorous, which builds her ethos as a writer, and also just comforting because it builds like an inside joke.
Sure. And I wouldn't necessarily say it was satire in that. I see what you mean though. Like she's definitely kind of like offering like a different point of view or a flip on perspectives, but that's a really good catch in terms of connotation, not the right word either, but just kind of like characterizing writing from a different standpoint, right? Where you think you're missing out, but at least you haven't burnt out. And so in this case, satire is a little strong because this piece isn't satirical by itself, but it does characterize writing as a different viewpoint. And then Shayla puts in here pathos, and you can definitely go back to pathos, logos, and ethos for your paragraphs here, which I'll show you in a second in terms of like different types of paragraphs you can establish. But in the case of pathos, Lewis alludes to the fear of not being a good writer and to, quote, not fancy yourself old. Pierce is fearful that she won't be successful anymore because she is too old, but Lewis reassures her that a lot of writers exhaust themselves too early. And it's good connection with what Andre mentioned earlier here. Perhaps it is just pathos in that case then. Alluding maybe a little strong just because alluding usually is for like works, but we know what you mean in that case, right? Like to refer to or to kind of just bring up in general. So maybe a combination of the two where she's characterizing for the sake of comfort, for the sake of like addressing her pathos in that way there. So in this case, the two combined will make a really good analysis. Anybody else for other devices that you came up with from this piece here? Maybe like one more before we move on? Anybody else? I'll take one more from Quinn real quick here on imagery, where she writes, boom. In lines 9 to 13, Lewis describes her success by metaphorically comparing it to, quote, an offspring developing and growing, and that what is left of oneself is only a poor husk. The comparison of a writer's work to an offspring paints an image of prospect, which inevitably triumphs the, quote, poor dusk, symbolic for fame. In using these objects, Lewis argues that her individual success is transient, like dust, and should not be celebrated. Rather, Pierce must look at how a novel will bring importance to society. Absolutely. And so it's a good mix between imagery and metaphor because it's the two working together, right? Of looking at the comparison of offsprings to husk. And what Quinn does well in this case here is some people will kind of keep it at this level where they'll mention where it exists, but then really explain like why it's a metaphor or what's important about it. But later in the rest of Quinn's answer, she's explaining and describing all the little choices and implications of those images, and also like why a metaphor, why imagery, and so forth there. And so in rhetorical analysis is always kind of asking the question of why do it this way? All right, pretty good responses. Let me just make sure the last bits are bolded here in terms of our devices, and we'll use some of these perhaps to craft our body paragraphs here. So this is kind of like our first step in our observations, right? We have to kind of consider what the author's generally doing throughout the entire piece, or at least add some key scenes, because by doing so, we can both craft our thesis, but also craft our body paragraphs along the way. So I want to do a quick lecture in terms of body paragraphs. I say quick, but it might not be. On the AP exam, when you're approaching it, or just for any analysis paper in general, there are three usual ways you can kind of structure your body paragraphs when it comes to outlining. And it might apply for other essays, but this is kind of like the most standard application you can do for rhetorical analysis. You can do your essay as a chronological paper based on the persuasive appeals, or you can look at the author's motifs, the most pertinent devices here. And I'll go over each one in its methods here, right? So if you were doing a chronological paper, your paragraphs would be pretty simple in terms of how you organize it. Author first begins with, author throughout does this, author at the end concludes with boom. And so as you're writing your body paragraphs, you basically have one paragraph dedicated to how the work begins, maybe like the first 1 or 2 paragraphs, one paragraph dedicated to the general message in between. So perhaps this big old paragraph here, some including of this one over here, and then one paragraph dedicated to how the author dedicated to end the work. So in this case, this last paragraph here in terms of the choices, the devices used, and that's kind of like rhetorical analysis paper 101, maybe the easiest way to approach it. If ever you're on the AP exam, you're thinking like, damn, how do I structure this? This is kind of like the easiest and cleanest way to be linear in your paper here. But it does kind of lead to be simple and restricting because you do have to break down the reading itself in your own essay, piece by piece by piece, right? On the other hand, you can kind of do the appeals. And Shayla offered pathos in her response, but I want to talk real quick about her response. She writes pathos, but she doesn't use it in her answer here. She doesn't use it in her actual response. And that's good. You want to do that. Can you use the categories of logos, ethos, pathos without having to use those terms here, right? So in the second way of how you organize your essay, you can dedicate one paragraph to ethos, one for logos, one for pathos, but more about the devices that add to logos, ethos, and pathos. So one paragraph perhaps that dedicates on how they establish themselves as an author, how they refer to the audience, one paragraph that's based on all the facts or reasonings that the author gives, but at the same time, how does the author throughout elicit empathy, sympathy, anger, disgust, joy, sorrow, and all that there. And just like that, you have another body paragraph set up for your essay if you want to do it this way. This one's a little bit more malleable, a little bit more flexible than the previous one, but it does kind of constrict you to categorizing and binning in those particular ways here. This is my personal favorite one, and it perhaps is the best one for sophistication. It's just the motifs. And so if you look at all the answers that we came up with in this slide here, we're looking for trends. We're looking for things that the author generally does, and we group them together, or we talk about them as a whole, because the author might be doing a lot of hyperphora in general, the author might be doing a lot of juxtaposition in general, the author might be doing a lot of long sentences in general, and I dedicate my paragraphs to those devices, those trends, those motifs into my essay here. So in these sections, I kind of broke it down like this, where I noticed, wow, Lewis sure does devalue the glory of an author a lot, because the entire time is just like concessions and paradoxes and negative connotations of writing. So writing is not so glamorous as you think it is. And I'm thinking at the same time, wow, Lewis sure does try her best to encourage peers that she is on the right path. A lot of this piece is really, comforting and really like, hey, you got this, girl. Just really positive in his tone. And I also noticed Lewis sure does depict herself not as a well-renowned author, but more as a person who's realized writing is super difficult. Like writing is not like, don't worry, you're going to open all of your best fantasies. No, writing sucks. It's really an arduous process, but you'll get there. So I'm noticing these 3 trends. I'm going to find examples for each one, and I'm going to make my body paragraphs based on that, based on the general things that she's doing here. So when you're doing the AP exam, when you're doing rhetorical analysis in general, any of these 3 would work. It's your choice, really. It's just whatever comes natural. I think Dylan wrote earlier in the chat, like, oh shit, I'm going to forget everything on the AP exam. And that happens. Don't get me wrong. Like, that's the problem with time stuff. It just throws all you've learned out the window, and you have to reclaim it back. But it's more so the lesson here of, all right, well, you have general strategies that you can kind of like embody in your head. So hopefully subconsciously or consciously, you draw them out when you're doing the actual exam itself. Now, my last little bit of lecture before I have you do our last classwork of the day, hopefully we get time to it, is I want to talk about, okay, if you really want to make sure you have all the components of a body paragraph, here you go. These are the 3 things you need to have in your body paragraphs, very much like the topic or the intro paragraphs. If you don't have them, you're missing out. So let me make this small caveat before I begin. Even though there's a formula, like always, you can always break the rules, replace things here and there, maybe not the topic sentence so much, but you want to make sure that you have these components, otherwise you don't have a full body paragraph. So with every body paragraph, look at your topic sentence, right? Do you observe one or maybe more of the rhetorical choices the author makes to support your thesis? So in general, what's the author doing? I give you sort of a sample structure to work with, especially for the first body paragraph. If you're super stuck and you're thinking like, shit, how do I start this whole thing? Here you go. Author's last name, Lewis begins by blah, 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 right? That's all you gotta do to start off your entire essay, just to begin this whole thing, and chronologically we're following you through. You also want to make sure that you have specific examples to support idea. This is the big one. This is where the 4 out of 4 basically exists in the essay, the evidence. You want to make sure you're providing explicit textual support woven into your comments to support your claim, meaning you can't just broadly say like, this piece is about how hard writing is. Yeah, that's true, but in what way, how is it, et cetera, right? You want to make sure you actually bring in some quotes or paraphrasings or whatever of what's actually going on in the piece. Discuss the strategies used in beginning section. Try to always kind of bring in 2 or more complex stylistic sentences, meaning that you want to make sure there's at least 2 examples chosen from the reading itself to put into your paragraph. That always works best than just one arbitrary example. And lastly, you want to make sure that you discuss how the examples support the idea. Okay, author's doing this in the entire essay, but how does this ultimately support your thesis, your topic sentence, your purpose, or the purpose of the author altogether, right? Just kind of like describe and explain, why is she doing this? Why is it significant? Why would it help someone like Lewis, someone like Pierce to get over her jitters regarding writing? You always want to emphasize on importance. So if you want to summarize body paragraph, just tell us what's being done, where do you see it being done, and why it's significant to the overall cause. Once you have that down, boom, you're good to go. So our little last bit of classwork that I want to go with here is, let's begin the process of building a body paragraph. Using the evidence that you came up with or the ones that others have contributed, develop a body paragraph. The very first one, the one that precedes or that comes after your intro paragraph, with a thesis, with the structures as guideline. I want you to try this one to be as structured as possible so you can break out into the fancy stuff here. Just be cognizant of like what exists in a body paragraph altogether. So in a few minutes, I want to go over thesis and topic sentences. But if you look at your sheet that I'm giving you here, I basically give you the structure for the, body paragraph. I want to ask you for thesis and topics to kind of like see what you start off with and to see if this body paragraph would make sense along with your thesis and all that there. Questions on instructions? Are we good? I hope that was kind of a lot, sorry. All right, I'll take that as a yes, but we'll see how it goes. I'll give about 3 to 4 minutes in terms of building your body paragraphs, but I'll be asking for your thesis and topic just to kind of see if you're on the right track for this here. Take about 3 or 4 minutes to kind of look at the general skeleton of it down, and then later I'll ask for a couple of volunteers for your thesis, your topic sentences. About 3 or 4 minutes. All right, that's about 3 minutes on my clock there. If you still need to work on this, no worries, because I'm going to go over a sample of my paragraph right here. Where to put it? Right here. Before I collect a few of yours, if you want to contribute your thesis / topic sentence. But I did the chronological one. I basically kind of like just took the structure and ran with it as it's displayed, and it looks something like this. So if I'm looking at topic sentence, and by the way, if I steal your answer, that's actually okay because you're kind of on the right track then, right? That you're actually like writing, I guess, to the formula or like at least to what's accepted. For the topic sentence to kind of to transition from my intro paragraph, the first thing I want to talk about in my body paragraph was Lewis begins her letter with a voice of empathy and concern and continues it throughout to reassure Pierce of her worries. And by the way, if you misspelled Pierce, that's okay. I think that's actually how you spell her name. She got like a funky name for how to spell Pierce because this is like what we usually associate with Pierce, but her name is E before I. So just saying, just if you thought you were correcting it, no, that's actually how to spell Pierce. But she begins her letter with a voice with empathy and concern. So in this case, my first paragraph is looking at how she begins the entire thing and perhaps how she continues it to reassure Pierce of her worries. So I'm looking at like tone here, right? Or at least like a voice in general. And so this entire paragraph is dedicated to those two elements and finding examples to support that. All right, well, if I'm claiming that there's a voice of empathy and concern to reassure Pierce, where do I see that? And for my body paragraph, my evidence is Lewis emphasizes on how unique Pierce is as a person to her, letting her know that, quote, I do not usually answer letters. So I'm picking like some specifics here, right? Yet she, quote, cannot keep total silence to Pierce's troubles. Despite what Pierce may think of Lewis's success, Lewis juxtaposes her success now with a past of despair, poor health, arrogance towards writing, and a life of impoverished living. So I'm basically like paraphrasing or summarizing what existed in the reading as a whole. I'm thinking about, okay, well, Pierce thinks that writing and writers live this very lavish, successful life. That's not true. As a writer, she was in a past of despair. She was poor health. She was arrogant towards writing. She was living a life of impoverished living. That's all my paraphrasing from the reading itself. All of which is very similar to Pierce's current situation or condition. So in this case, I'm kind of like making the association and like the connection that this author tried to do. I had a shitty past, you do too. We're kind of in the same boat, you know what I mean? And now I got to explain to myself, okay, but what's significant about doing this? So for me, I was thinking, but in portraying all these negativities, Lewis is essentially claiming that she was once Pierce, the writer who was, quote, stuck. By offering the humility of her past, she makes clear that writing is not glamorous, even in retrospect. And so I'm just kind of like inferring the reasons of why she brought this in, of why she's putting this into her letter. It's for a voice of empathy and concern is to reassure because she was once there. And everything ties together with these three sections. It's kind of a shorter body paragraph, but it basically fulfills all the elements here. So with that in mind, if you're kind of close to this or you have something different altogether, let me just open the floor then to look at your two-piece combo, your thesis and your topic for what you came up with. Any challengers for this last bit here? And again, just thesis and topic sentence in the sense that I want to see how you're actually like moving from one paragraph to another and what is it going to prove and contain in relations to your thesis. Any takers? There is a drink. Oops, oh no. If you think yours is bad, then you're on the right path of being a writer because you're actually critical about your work, just like what Lewis is saying. But go ahead, let me see your thesis and topic sentence. Damn, this is the whole body paragraph? Wait, is this the whole body paragraph though? Because I'm just looking for thesis and topic sentence. No worries. Yeah. So let me just go back. Wait, hold on. Can you condense into the 2 sentences then for me? And we'll start with Julie's real quick then to kind of see what we came up with here. Boom. Right, but okay, there we go. That was what I'm looking for. Boom. So as Ivy hopefully is kind of condensing hers into 2 sentences, we'll look at Julie's first to kind of consider what she did for a thesis and topic sentence, if they connect and if it proves the thesis altogether, right? So she wrote, as she discusses the evolution of her personal writing career, Pierce passionately reveals that the development of successful writers lies within the maintenance of patience in the earlier years of the career, as well as the importance of writing to their own desires and interests to truly gain satisfaction in their own work and happiness in life. So this is a very complex thesis altogether, and it includes the components of, she's discussing her evolution, she's revealing the development of writers, all for the point of kind of like to impose or to kind of like, you know, put down this idea that the importance of writing to their own desires and interests to gain satisfaction in their work and happiness. This has to be proven throughout the entire piece, and this has to be like one of the main elements of the message here. So the topic sentence kind of has to connect with this altogether. In this first part, Jolie starts out with, throughout her letter, Pierce contrasts her restless mindset in the earlier years of her writing career with her current matured, restless mindset in the earlier years of her writing career with the current mature status of a writer who finally found enjoyment and pride in producing her own writing. Absolutely. So in this case, the contrasting of her restless mindset in earlier years with her current mature status is to show the importance of writing to their own desires and interests. And so my point here is this, and Jolie does a good job with her example here, is that when you're writing your topic sentences and eventually your body paragraphs, there should be a link between these paragraphs with your thesis. If you're writing about like way irrelevant or way off topic stuff that doesn't relate with your thesis, then it's super confusing and it kind of throws you off track then, right? So every body paragraph has to basically be another layer, another point regarding your thesis here. So this works altogether for a thesis and topic sentence, and the subsequent body paragraphs would follow the same pattern basically. Ivy, did you want to contribute yours or want to hold out on that? It's not bad. I'm pretty sure it's not bad. All right, so this is a really good example. I wanted to go over one last thing with you before the end of the session, just because we want to look at body paragraphs and the successes. So this is from a 9 out of 9 body paragraph from the essay. Same essay, same prompt, right? But we're going to look at what they put into the body paragraph to make a really successful writing altogether. And if you want to refresh real quick, you have the slides later on, but a quick recap. This is the first body paragraph of the student who wrote the student sample thesis or intro paragraph that we read together. And her, or his, I don't know, actually, thesis was, writing to Miss Lewis, Miss Pierce reached out for support, and her plea to Lewis was so, quote, touching and tender that it elicited a response. In response, Lewis consoles Pierce by explaining her views on the development of a writer. Using metaphor and personal experiences, she succeeds in her quest to offer advice to the burgeoning Pierce. So in this case, she's probably going to mention metaphor, personal experiences, explaining her views of the development of writer, hopefully to, you know, talk about the success in her quest so that she can offer advice to Pierce in this case. So reading this last part here, this is what they wrote for a body paragraph. In the relatively short opening paragraph of her letter, Lewis first compliments Pierce by crafting a letter so poignant and well-written as to elicit a response from a busy author she has passed the first test of a writer. The following paragraph completely redefines the two women's relationship. Rather than accept Pierce's view that she is innately superior to Lewis, Lewis humbles herself and raises Pierce, noting that the first step in becoming a writer is simply to have a dream. a dream of, quote, exaltation. Following this observation, Lewis likens all writers to pregnant women as, quote, offspring develop inside them. Such writers feel that they are only, quote, husks or vehicles. Third, Lewis again sympathizes with Pierce as she delineates the writer's paradox. The more writers write, the more frustrated they become with the inadequacy of their own creation. Damn, that's a pretty good body paragraph. So let's talk about some of the successes. This author doesn't really have a super traditional or clear topic sentence, but they begin with the chronology, right? They begin with the whole, how does this author start? Then she gives a couple of examples throughout in terms of the essay to kind of talk about devices that exist in here. And they even offer the device as well as sort of like the interpretation with it here. So in this case, just as an example, they wrote like, third, Lewis again sympathizes with Pierce as she delineates the writer's paradox, explains the paradox, that the more writers write, they become more frustrated and so forth. So this author is basically kind of doing like, here's my topic sentence. Here's an example from the text. Let me explain it. Example from text, explain it, and they're just layering and layering on. And so this is really concise and brevity at its best. And that's the writing that you want to kind of look for and aim for as you're doing your body paragraphs altogether. They know what they're putting in here. They know what they're observing. They know how they want to approach the body paragraphs. Boom, just like that. So with this in mind, you want to be able to craft your body paragraphs in the same way where, do you have a clear topic sentence? Do you have clear evidence to discuss regarding your topic sentence? And are you explaining it thoroughly throughout? So with that in mind, I think the homework's at the very end of the sheet here for next time. Homework itself is actually pretty simple. I'll explain it real quick if you have it open here. So verbatim, it says this. While we analyze Faulkner's Nobel speech early on, we now turn to, oh, here he is again, John Steinbeck's speech years later for the same award. As you read the speech, complete the 2 tasks of analysis. So I gave you the whole speech, but I want you to be able to see how authors structured their own pieces as well. I'm going to ask you if you could break down the piece into intro, body, and conclusion. Where do you think the intro, the beginning of it all, starts and ends? Where do you think the bulk of the argumentation takes place? And where do you think the author's getting to the actual ending of their speech altogether? And with that, I'd like to talk about what is the content for each one? What are they containing together? And how are they transitioning them? And then we're talking about conclusions next time. So I want to get started with that here. I want you to consider that with the contents of the entire speech that you've read, why does Steinbeck want to conclude with this following message here? Why end a letter or a speech or whatever in the following way? Just kind of like infer and analyze in that case there. So that's for next time. That's for Monday. I'll stick around for a few more questions, but otherwise, any questions on class, content, or anything like that? Questions?
Let's see.
Hope that was clear? I don't know. I hope so.
So, Mr. Lin,
Yes.
this is essentially rhetorical analysis, but instead of like writing stuff down, it's more like observing like what Steinbeck does well.
Well, it's not so much of what he does well yet. It's more so of like every author almost like writing a short story, whatever, right? You have like your beginning, your climax, your end. So how do authors kind of like break down their pieces in those 3 categories? And what's included in them? If that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Lin.
Any other questions?
When are you uploading that episode
Of what?
of Battle Cuisine or Cuisine Royale or whatever it is?
And make that public.
No.
Slayer.
No. I already sent it to you, though. I sent it to you.
You did? Oh my
Yeah.
god.
Come on, C9 Slayer.
Oh, is it C9 Slayer?
No, it's not.
Oh, no.
All right, but if you get another class to go to, feel free to,
Ooh, I
do your
see.
thing.
Oh,
but
shit, I do.
What?
I do have another class.
All right. Well, good luck with that. Fare thee well.
Talking about C9, they want LCS.
Oh yeah, they did. They stopped hard.
Yeah.
LCS, David?
What's up?
And they broke the trophy, Mr. Lin.
They're like, we don't need this shit. See you, Andrew. damn, it's Mr. Collins' birthday today?
I love you. Oh yeah.
Oh,
this
it
Sean.
is?
Yeah.
Yo, send me that Zoom invite. I'm gonna go give him that.
Oh yeah, put it in the chat. We'll all go
It's on
there.
Classroom.
Wait, what?
Hey Zoran.
What?
Tell Kong his daddy said happy birthday.
Huh?
Yes.
Hey,
So-
let's all go into.
Hey, Annie.
Oh yeah, join the Ace call. Yeah, I want to join it. Let me join.
Yeah,
Send me
let's
the link,
all
send
go
me-
into Apes Call.
Yeah, let's go on the Ace call.
We'll raid him.
Yeah, let's raise
See you
it.
guys.
The
Wait,
raid.
send the link. Send the link.
Send the link. Send the link in
Send
the
the
chat.
link.
Come
No,
on.
no,
This is a
don't.
Twitch raid.
If you're going to say it, then do it in a respectable fashion. Don't fuck up his class like that.
We'll
Yeah,
go
of
in. We'll
course.
say happy birthday. We'll come out.
In and out. Like my dude.
Alright, see you, Mr. Lin.
Yeah, see
Robin
you,
out.
Hey, Mr. Lin, you said you asked how was your day?
See you, Anna. How's my day?
Yeah, you asked that.
How's my wait? It's okay, I guess. Why is he asking?
I don't know. He's telling me to ask you.
Oh, why don't you just ask me directly then?
He's playing League.
This dude.
Yeah, he wasn't in your class the whole time.
This dude.
Weeaboo out.
Peace.
Yeah, see you, Mr. Lin.
See ya, guys.
Mr. Lin, why is it unlisted?
See, Jenny. Because it is something that I don't care to share in public.
Oh, okay.
But it's also really janky and laggy anyway, so you know.
That looks pretty good on my end. Oh wait, no, yeah, you're right.
It's like, hold on. That's not true. All right. If no other questions, let me. I might need to learn a little early just because I do need to finish putting grades in. So.
Oh. Okay.
Any other prevailing questions? We all good?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I will see you guys next time then. I will put those grades in, and then later I will see you guys on Monday.
All right.
Peace out,
Bye.
guys.
See you Monday.
Peace out, guys.